I am delighted today to be having a conversation with my good friend, Bob Krist. Bob and I go back a ways. I started at National Geographic in 1985, and Bob was already there, but we had the pleasure of working together there for almost a decade. And I can tell you that he's an incredibly accomplished photographer and filmmaker who has traveled the world relentlessly for National Geographic and other publications. And he has also done a lot of work in film, and his films have won in film festivals, and they've won the Lowell Thomas Award, which is a distinguished travel award. And he does a lot of publishing of his books, of his travels, and his most recent one that's just come out is called Old Souls and Timeless Places. And Bob was kind enough to send it to me a couple of weeks ago. And I can tell you, it is a spectacular book that is kind of a retrospective that features his portraits and his landscape images, and it's beautifully reproduced in black and white. So I recommend it highly. Bob is also an accomplished writer and does a lot of the writing that accompanies his photographs when he's working for magazines. And I think he's also an incredibly accomplished storyteller, perhaps drawing on his previous career as an actor. But I've enjoyed, many conversations with Bob over the years on all this stuff. So Bob, welcome to today, and I appreciate you being on with me.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on with you, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Your fans have been clamoring for this conversation, so I just want you to know that. No pressure, but, here we are. So,
thanks, Mom. Yeah, right.
So, Bob, why don't you go ahead and let's get started, and you can talk a little bit about your work and how things are going.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start by kind of talking about the last 10 years of my work, and I'm going to do that in a keynote with some videos. And rather than talk too much about it, I'm going to start with a video that I did not make, but I was the subject of, and it was commissioned by AOL, and they were doing a series of short video documentaries about people who had been in the same profession for over 40 years. It was called Lifers. and a young filmmaker in my town, who my boys grew up with, was pitching stories to them, and he got a lot of lifer assignments, and he knew that Peggy and I spent our winters in San Miguel de Allende, so he pitched me. He checked to make sure I was old enough. He was pretty sure I was ancient enough, and I had been doing it for 40 years, that was the case. So he pitched me, and he came down with his crew, and he did a little story about my late career, and I'm going to get into the screen share, and I'll start with that movie. Hopefully, it'll run smoothly or smooth enough, and then I'll give about a little 20-minute presentation, and then you and I can chit-chat and get into it.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to go into
Bob.
Screen share here, and we'll see if this works.
All righty.
One thing that you pick up when you've hit as many countries as I have, you just see a lot of different and very unique cultures. And the thing that strikes me about this is that on one level, we're all the same. We all want a secure life for ourselves and our family. We all want a good life for our children. And that's the basic kind of human condition. But overlaid in that is these amazing cultures and languages, the variety, the richness of the human tapestry. So my thing has kind of been to try to bring back the stories of different cultures to people in the United States through the magazines and the websites and everything like that, because it's important to have a sense of the world. My name is Bob Krist, and I'm a photographer. I've been a professional since 1976. Working for the National Geographic is just about every still photographer's dream, and it was my dream, because I had traveled. I didn't want to spend my life in Jersey City and Hoboken. I was able to get this appointment with Bob Gilka, that director of photography at National Geographic. He just tore me apart. Kid, if you want to be a better photographer, you're going to have to stand in front of more interesting stuff. So I had a story proposal called The New Jersey Nobody Knows. And he threw the contract across the desk at me and said, "Here, kid, why don't you try it, see how you do." I loved it. The minute I picked up the camera and started documenting my travels, it really resonated with me. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some hardships involved with this, dream job of traveling the world on somebody else's nickel. There aren't too many intact marriages among my colleagues who do this kind of work.
That's the secret to our marriage, is that we have been married 43 years, but we haven't spent 43 years together. Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Soon after we had children, my wife stayed home from her corporate job and started working for me. She would manage my schedule, book assignments, so we worked as a team.
When I started tagging along with him, I was given the title, and he even had a little badge for me called Tripod Sherpa.
For me, for a photograph to really work, it has to have three elements. It has to have great light, it has to have strong composition, and it has to have that sense of moment. Why are you slicing off this 125th of a second and not the one before or after? I don't have a plan to retire. I think retirement for me is just going to be slowing down.
I think a better word instead of retire is reinvent.
I still shoot plenty of stills, but the short video documentary for online stuff is really my new passion. One of the things I'm enjoying about this period of life is coming up with my own stories. And if an editor doesn't want it, the heck with it, I'll do it anyway. I've been looking for interesting stuff to stand in front of for the last 40 years. So, from moving from stills to video, some late career strategies here. What prompted the move? Travel magazines that did good cultural coverage were either folding or turning themselves into lifestyle type magazines in an attempt to woo younger readers and younger ad buyers. Even National Geographic traveler stories in the final years look like fashion catalog layouts featuring the cast of Friends goes on vacation. It wasn't the old cultural coverage that it used to be. It was more of a lifestyle and interior type of a thing. So many pictures of plates of food and cups of cappuccino and Jennifer Aniston lookalikes laughing at cafe tables. I never wanted to shoot a spread that looked like this one ever again. So I, at the same time, places like Instagram were also ushering in a new travel aesthetic, the kind of selfie, hey, look at me aesthetic. And travel stock photography had already lost its value and had become a cheap commodity. And I have to say that at that point, I was really pretty discouraged. I was totally fed up, to tell you the truth. And I had a road to Damascus moment at a camera club convention down in Virginia about 10 years ago. I was reviewing the print gallery at the club convention with the fellow presenter, and we had a rude awakening. These folks could shoot, they could do Photoshop, they could put out work that was absolutely first class. And the reason was, who knows, the fast learning curve of digital, the fact that unemployed pros were running photo tours and workshops and sharing their favorite locations and techniques. Whatever it was, the truth was, there's not much we can teach these guys anymore. And combine that with a dwindling magazine market, and you've got a professional photographer's nightmare. So I took a kind of a little hiatus, and I said, okay, I took a self-examination at, about the age of 57 or 58. And I asked myself, what can I do that they can't do? What can I do that almost all advanced amateurs and hardly any, very few pros can do? And that was, I can photograph people and I can tell stories with my photos. I had always worked for magazines, so I was always shooting in terms of story. I was never going after individual images. And I could get close to people. And Dan Westergren, who was the editor at Traveler, used to say that he has millions of photographers who can shoot gorgeous landscapes and wildlife, but only a couple dozen that can do that and shoot people. So I thought for a second, should I try to become a portrait and people photographer. And then that that didn't really appeal. The storytelling was a little tough in that area. At the same time, manufacturers began to put video capabilities into cameras. And I thought, now, hold on, what do most documentary and narrative films consist of? They're visual stories about people. So, you know, the light went off on the head with the help of a colleague. I was inspired by Tom, our mutual friend, Bob Sasha, who left a thriving stills career to study film. And I thought to myself, whoa, maybe I can be a filmmaker too. So here's a little, my first real major documentary. This is just the trailer for it. It was shot in Iceland, and it was a derivative of a story that I had found when I was doing the Iceland coverage for National Geographic. So it's about 30 seconds long.
A stark, beautiful, and unforgiving highland landscape, roamed every summer by 1 million sheep and horses in free-range pasture. A small but determined population who need to bring their livestock down to the inhabited coastal areas before the killing winter cold sets in. This is the Icelandic ritual called réttir, and it has been going on each and every autumn since the island was first settled by Vikings in the 900s. 1,000 Autumns is the story of a young farmer named Ingvar, leader of one of the 60 réttir groups that form every fall. Ingvar and his team of hard-working, hard-playing men and women battle the rains, life-threatening floods, unforgiving terrain, and towering waterfalls to bring their animals back to safety.
But it was a long road to be able to make a decent 18-minute film. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 18 minutes, it's like a magnum opus. It's a pretty daunting task to attempt to take a new road at the age of 58. But I threw myself into it just the way I kind of taught myself photography. I took online courses. I studied the work of a ton of young filmmakers who were doing some remarkable short films. I just became like a vacuum cleaner of good short films out there. To practice my newly learned skills, I started doing short films, little personality sketches about interesting characters in my neck of the woods. At the time was Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I'm up in Maine now. And one day I got a call from a representative of Pennsylvania Tourism that said, we've seen those character sketches you've got on Vimeo. We'd like you to do some of those for us. And wham, it was off to the races. All of a sudden, I had really good budgets. I had no preconceived recipes like I had to fill in that last 5 years of travel magazine shooting, the cappuccino cup pictures and stuff. I was able to find the subjects, determine the story. And it was just amazing. It seemed that it pulled together all the elements that I had been working on my whole career: storytelling, dealing with people, making nice pictures, even interviewing and everything. So it really was kind of an epiphany. And I shot 12 of those for them. And the money was great and everything. And after that, they actually asked me to bid on a TV commercial. And I was like, okay, this is the Peter principle. I've reached it. But I said, what the heck? I did some research. I found out what major Philly ad agencies were pitching to them, and I knocked off maybe $5,000, but it was still an enormous amount of money in my world anyway. And they gave it to me, and so I got to shoot, produce, write a 30-second TV spot that showed for a year on all the New York stations during the syndicated morning shows. And yes, this is the cast of Friends Goes on Vacation in Bucks County. But this time, I'm getting paid way more money than I was before, so I didn't mind doing this occasionally in between my more authentic things. So here's a little 30-second spot that check out our voiceover guy. He makes me tremble every time I hear his voice. He's like the NFL guy.
It's a place that inspires the dreamers the overachievers. A place for those who follow the path, as well as the ones who blaze them. So whether you want to go with the flow or rise above it all, visit Bucks County and be inspired.
So yeah, I can shoot the cast of friends going on vacation if you pay me enough. So as I gained a little experience, I decided to write some how-to about the unique problems we still photographers face when we go into motion. And unlike my travel photography blog, this one would not be written from the point of view of an expert, because I was no expert and I'm still not an expert. I'm learning, but from the point of view of a beginner who's maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of the reader. I always kind of consider myself in the regard of teaching film, like the substitute teacher who's 2 lessons ahead in the plan book than the students are. And at this time, I also thought I'd just go ahead and embrace my curmudgeonhood with the name of the blog and the logo. But as I got busier shooting assignments, the blog fell by the wayside. But for young photographers starting out and for established pros looking to inject something a little in a flagging career, the markets for video storytelling are the same as stills, but with a few key differences in my experience. Most every institution these days has realized the power of video to reach their viewers, customers, and clients, and that's where their budget money is going. It's not going so much to print anymore. There are far fewer production companies competing for this growing market than there are still shooters vying for dwindling markets. Now, this will not be the case for too much longer. Probably, nature abhors a vacuum, and if that's where the work is, that's where the talent's going to go. And there's a lot of great filmmaking talent, but a lot of it is coming out of the still world. And so I really encourage you guys to really look into this as a booster for your career. NGOs, tourist boards, foundations, schools, nonprofits, museums, restaurants, the list is endless, and they all need their stories told. And then, when you're in between assignments, you can just go in your backyard and work on your B-roll, which is what I did when I first moved up here to Maine in this next short video. Shooting all this video, a funny thing happened to my photography while I was shooting all this video. Lately, in the last 5 years, most of my clients are high-end travel companies that run these private jet tours and stuff. And I started off doing stills for them, and then they asked me to segue over to video. They wanted the video assets. So I was freed from having to produce stills on demand, getting every dining room shot or whatever it was. And I just started to shoot, as we traveled, the pictures that really meant something to me. I wasn't, for the first time in my career, I wasn't trying to fill the categories, street scenes, people, history, landscape. I was just, coming across people and places. When it really struck me, I broke out the little point and shoot black and white camera, and I did it. It was a very kind of freeing experience for me. And for some reason, I chose to go back to black and white. And I'm not really sure, other than that, I think the thing that first drew me to photography was that book, Family of Man. So I just started shooting in black and white. And the result was a series of portraits and landscapes that I really wanted to put into a book, and was able to with this Old Souls and Timeless Places. And I went back to some of my original color work and converted that, but most of the book, I'd say about 80% of the book, is shot in the last 5 years, and shot in black and white and infrared black and white for a lot of the landscapes. But it's been a wonderful experience, and we're using it as a fundraiser for our family's foundation that grants scholarships to inner city kids in memory of my youngest son. So it's been a win-win situation there. Thank you for sticking with me, and I'm going to stop the screen share now, and we'll pick up our conversation.
Bob, fantastic work. Love what I was seeing. It's great. I'm not surprised, but it's always great to sort of see the different pieces of your life assembled in the way that you just presented. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
I want to go back. I want to ask you, I've got so many questions, but I want to go back to the origins of your getting into photography and how that influenced you in terms of thinking about your own career. Because I think that's a question often that comes up as people are trying to find their way forward and figure out what they can do to not only have a career in photography, but also sort of how to make a contribution. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, my path to photography was a wavy one. I was seriously studying, and I was working as an actor in summer stock and everything. Acting was my first love, and my freshman year at college, the company that I was working with, it wasn't the college company, it was a local professional company, got a grant to tour Europe. And I was saving up for a stereo system at that point, the speakers, the turntable and everything. And I figured, well, I'm going to be going to Europe for a year. Let me buy a camera. And I bought a camera instead of taking turntables with me to Europe. And one of the other actors in the company was a pretty good photographer, and acting is night work, basically. So during the days we were on a tour, we lived in Amsterdam, and we were on what they called the Mickery Circuit Tour. It was an English language theater chain. They had one in Amsterdam, one in Paris, one in Vienna, one in Berlin, and then they did a lot of university bookings as well. So we would take a show. We'd live in a communal house in Amsterdam. We'd take a show presented in Amsterdam and then go on the road for 3 weeks at each of those stops. And this other actor and I were just wandering the streets, making travel pictures and kind of learning on the job, trying to meet young ladies. That was another motivation. So I don't have very pure motivations about getting into photography. And in a way, I'm super serious about it, and I have been my whole career. But in a way, I was not serious about photography in the same way I was about my art, my acting, and it freed me a little to enjoy it and to look upon it as something that maybe I can make a little money and I can enjoy myself and I can get better at this craft. But but wandering those streets of Europe in those early years with that camera really kind of set something in my head in terms of travel and documenting travel and everything. I came back. I worked a couple of seasons at People's Light and Theater Company outside of Philadelphia, and then there was a recession. And by that time, I had become pretty good at shooting headshots and for actors and actresses and production stills. And but the recession came. We lost our funding. I moved back to my parents' house in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and I had like an $800 MasterCard bill, and I had no means to pay for it. So I was going to live there until I could hit the auditions and get something. And the kid that grew up next door to me was a reporter at the Hudson Dispatch in Union City, New Jersey, a paper that we both used to deliver. And he came over and he said, you do photography, don't you? And I said, yeah, but I've never done any news work or anything like that. And he said, well, we're looking for photographers and it pays $145 a week. And I said, every week? I said, that's, wow, holy smokes, that's real money. So I put on my wedding suit and I took my pictures of Europe and pretty actresses down to see the editor. This was 1975 or early 76, down to see the editor in Union City. And he's looking at my pictures and he's like this old Irish guy. He's saying, it's clear to me you got no experience. And it's clear to me that you got no training. He said, but you do make a nice appearance in your suit and tie. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a 3-week tryout. And he gave me a 3-week tryout, during which all this amazing spot news was happening in front of me. There was an emergency little Cessna landing on the New Jersey Turnpike just when I was paying my toll. And I'm in there and in my car, I'm an actor and I'm seeing this plane that looks like it's going to land. And I'm thinking, Jesus, what would a photographer do? Is that this news? So I jump out, I get the pictures, and I got a couple of situations like that. And at the end of the 3 weeks, he was convinced that he had the idiot savant of spot news photography on his hands, and he gave me the job. And so I would show up every day with my suit, the same suit and my little Minolta, and I became like hooked on it. There was a couple of more experienced shooters on the paper, the great Jed Kirschbaum, who had a long and storied career at the Baltimore Sun. He was trained, I was like flying by the seat of my pants, but Jed kind of took me under his wing and told me about picture stories, and I looked at his work, and then we'd get a lot of picture pages and stuff, and I'd love to do stories about the people and shoot the picture pages. And what started as something I was going to stay at long enough to pay my MasterCard bill turned into a 5-year apprenticeship. I just became totally hooked on the process. But, having traveled and lived abroad, I didn't want to stay in Jersey City shooting Little League. So in those days, you could, if you were an award-winning, I think I won New Jersey Press Photographer of the Year one year. And in those days, you could get an audience with, a couple of directors of photography before you, Bob Gilka. And I went down and that's how I got my foot in the door with Geographic. And then I started to freelance after that. And so it's a long story and a twisted story, but that's how I ended up, that 5 years of experience working on the streets of Jersey City and Hoboken and Union City was invaluable. And I really needed it. It set me up for the rest of my career.
The aesthetic language that you use today, I mean, the images that you just have showed were in film and in stills are just exquisite. And I mean, that's something that I've always admired in your work. How consciously, as you started out, were you working on aesthetic language as a part of this, versus, working on trying to understand how to interact with people to draw them out so that they would give you the moments that, that you're also so good at capturing?
Well, my touchstone, and I'm not just saying this because of you, Tom, but my touchstone was the Geographic. That's where I used to look at the Geographic till my eyes burned holes in the pages. And so Bill Allard, Harvey, all these guys, that's what I wanted. I wanted to look like those guys, you know, but you can't look like anybody else. You can try to incorporate work. And, you know, I love the elegance. I love the use of light and color and everything. And a lot of ways when I started freelancing, I started to kind of use, again, the actor's technique of what's my motivation. I would look at a picture, let's say, of, I don't know, Allard had a shepherd up on a top of a mountain at sunrise with the flock coming. And as an actor, I would say, okay, so how was he there and why was he there? What did he want and how did he get it? And so I kind of reverse engineered pictures, and that's the way I taught myself photography. And as far as the interacting with people, I think when you come from the theater is it's a group activity. You're with people. One of the hardest things I had to get used to with photography, both news photography and especially freelance photography, was working by myself. God, did I hate that. I was like so used to having a cast and cast parties, and it took a village to make a play. And so that made, I was very kind of outgoing. I could be outgoing, especially if I have a reason. Now, it's funny, as I was pursuing my career, I started looking at working alone as not being a disadvantage, but an absolute advantage. And now I don't want to be bothered. You know, now I'm a true old curmudgeon. But I think the theater work helped me. And I think in terms of reaching and talking to people, I think it's important that, especially in this day and age, because everybody's so ready to misunderstand, is to project a non-threatening presence and a genuine interest in the life of the person that you want to photograph. And when you speak the same language, that's kind of easy and everything. But a lot of it, I think, might have to do with body language and everything. And this is something that, it may be hard to believe, but a lot of the Shakespearean roles I played were the drunks and the clowns. When I was in the theater, I know it's completely typing against that. You know, it's against the, you know. But
totally.
I have a kind of a joshin, joking way of approaching people. Peggy, my wife, always reminds me. She said, "You know, you're 6'2" and you're as big as a doorway. You're a threatening presence." I always think of myself as like 5'7" and 140 pounds. So I'm very aware of not trying to be physically intimidating. I try to take interest in what the people are doing, and I'm not above, you know, being a little goofy to relax people. It doesn't always work, but it works. And then when you're in a foreign country and you have that language barrier, that gets a little harder. Often you're working with a fixer or something like that. But I think there's a vibe that people give off right away. If you're comfortable, they'll be comfortable. If you're uncomfortable, they're gonna pull back. So I think it's the theater training and that kind of natural outgoingness, which is funny. It's funny in a way. If I have a camera, I'm very outgoing and stuff. But if I'm at a cocktail party, if I don't have Peggy in front of me running interference, I just want to curl up in a ball. So it seems like it's the camera. If I have a mission, I can be friendly and hail fellow, well met. At the average cocktail party, I just want to go home. You know, I'm not that gregarious.
It's so interesting because I would never ever in a million years think that about you, Bob. You know, because all the years we've worked together, I've always seen you as the person you are behind the camera. That's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm terrible at cocktail parties and receptions. I just want to go home but you know, if I'm there to photograph it, I can be the life of the party. And I think that's another thing with actors, especially stage actors. You know, some of your best actors are total introverts when they're off stage, and on stage they do anything. You know, and there's a little bit of that in the way I operate too, I think.
When you're thinking, you know, I'm particularly fascinated by your transition from stills to video, but as you were getting, you know, as we, for example, when we worked together at National Geographic, you were skilled at drawing out the specific individual elements that would then be crafted into a story. What was your process about thinking at the outset about what you were going to go after, and then putting yourself in the right situations to get that, get that material?
Well, most of the time, soon after you and I started working together, I think Malta was the last job I did for the Yellow Magazine. And when you were working for the Yellow Magazine, it was a big journalistic story, and there were some clear themes and everything. And I segued over to Traveler because I wanted to see the family a little more and everything. And Traveler at that time was still doing more cultural than lifestyle kind of coverage. And so, honest to God, I would make a little category list for myself: people, places, culture, history, street scenes, everyday life, festivals and special events. And I'd have a little yellow pad in there to make sure and every day when I came in, what I'd cover, I'd fill in the categories, and to make sure I had a well-rounded story. And that's what I started off doing that, and then it became an organic process of covering all those things. Left to my own devices, I'd shoot people and landscapes. I'd never go in and shoot architecture or history or anything like that. So that's the way I structured it, and then I try to just find interesting stories, interesting characters, looking for that serendipity, something a little special in a person or a location, and cover it that way. So it was. I've always had an eye out for things that resist homogenization, for traditions and people who are originals, who kind of, that nail that sticks up a little, I'm drawn to those people. And if you go on my Vimeo site and you look at my character sketches, not the ones that, even the ones that I've done on commission, but the ones I do for myself, when I latch on to somebody who's an original, I want to tell that story. And so that's what draws me. And that's what kind of organized me. Now, in terms of film, it's a little different because there is a story arc, and all you guys now who had liberal arts educations and they told you it was useless, all you English majors. I was an English major. It's not useless. The story, Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, the myth, every Hollywood movie, every documentary, every interesting film that grabs you has an appealing character who goes on a journey, overcomes obstacles, and is changed by the process. And whether it's a Hollywood epic or a little 8-minute movie about a lobster fisherman or whatever, that same story arc is necessary to grab your audience and take them on the journey. And when you think about what television shows you like, what movies you like, it's the same thing. It's the hero myth. And so I've really been going back, as well as trying to learn the technical aspects of filmmaking. I've really kind of tried to study the science of story, and it blows my mind that it is a science and everything. And how do you apply it to, say, the message of an NGO or a nonprofit trying to raise money? How do you get them to buy into the concept of story?
I think that's so interesting, Bob, because I made a point of, I had to teach for a while, and when I was teaching, obviously I wanted to bring that to the classroom, because I don't think it's necessarily the first impulse of journalistic teaching in a certain way. I mean, you do teach story, obviously, but I mean, thinking about it in the Hollywood context that you're describing, one thing that really stood out to me is that even with that as the base frame, you can do an endless variety of variations, right? And
oh yeah,
so,
it's limitless.
Talk about that.
Well, part of what I've been doing lately is doing some work for, let's say, NGOs and foundations and charities and whatnot, and trying to apply the hero myth to a charity story. this is the way most charities and foundations want to do their films. They want the executive director to sit in a chair and say, we here at Maine Charities, we send 163 meals every week, and we put houses over 99 senior citizens, and we do this and we do that, and they'll cut the B-roll of senior citizens smiling and stuff, and it's like it's a snore fest. I was approached by our mutual friend Bill Black, who was doing some work for Endeavor Horse Therapy. It's a horse therapy farm that they use horses to do therapy with PTSD vets, handicapped children, and everything. And when Bill brought me in to work with them, I had to do a hard sell on them, saying, no, I don't want a list of how many veterans have been through here. Let's take one veteran. Mm-hmm. Take one veteran and let's show his story. Because in terms of these short films, people can lock onto the story of one person, but they can't take it. They just zone out. And I heard a great analogy the other day, and I don't know, it was maybe on one of the many instructional videos I watch, especially during the shutdown. Man, I'm just like a big sponge. But the analogy was made, if I take a tennis ball and I throw a tennis ball at you, you're going to catch it more than likely. But if I take 10 tennis balls and throw it at you, you're going to miss all of them. And that's been the problem with a lot of the storytelling in fundraising and NGOs and stuff. Tell one story, tell it well, and everything. And if you can convince your client to do something like that, you can do some pretty nice films for commissioned work.
So when you're making that kind of a pitch, are you bringing in real examples of your previous works to demonstrate what you're talking about as a way of convincing?
Yes, I actually had a presentation that had before and afters, and the befores were all terrible films done by other people about, with an executive saying, yes, and we have 160 hotel rooms, and you can dine at one of our 50 restaurants, and then I'd have my sexy, personality profile, and that made the point. Yeah. And that's why, I've always been a great believer in shooting without an assignment, just shooting for your own self. When I was at the newspaper, we were all black and white, but you guys, National Geographic and Travel and Leisure were color. So I would go out on vacation and make believe I was on assignment for National Geographic and shoot color slides and stuff. And I remember when I was really wanted to be a travel guy after a couple of years at the paper, and Peggy and I were looking at our pennies and saying, what's the closest, most exotic place that we can afford? And we went down to Haiti, and wow, that was an education. It was when Haiti was still, before it had blown up and everything. So I was making believe before I was really ever doing that. And I think it's important to do that, to shoot your own self-guided projects and shoot what you want to get. Shoot the kind of projects that you want to get. And that's always been my philosophy.
As you made the transition from stills to video, I mean, obviously there's, I always feel like it's like going from checkers to playing three-dimensional chess in some ways, but obviously sound and the actual concept of motion as an animating spirit for the film. What did you do to begin to hone those skills and really master that part of the craft?
Well, I wouldn't say that I've mastered it yet, but I chose, the thing to do is to start very small, and of course I'm a huge consumer of online instructors and online classes and whatnot. But that's a great analogy. It is kind of like going from stills to multi-dimensional chess, and sometimes it's a case of be careful what you wish for. Because I can remember sometimes when I was shooting an interview for one magazine or the paper, and I'm listening to the reporter or writer interviewing the subject. I'm saying, damn, those are dumb questions. I could do a better interview than that, you know. Well, until you sit there, you know, you don't really know. So my advice is to start small. And you're bringing up a point that I'm kind of hitting now, and that is, at a certain point with film and video, it does take a village. The lone knight riding out and shooting a National Geographic assignment by him or herself, that's harder to do in video, because you do have to keep a lot more plates spinning. There's sound, there's, you know, all this kind of thing. So usually I'm finding that my best work these days is done at least with a second shooter or an apprentice or somebody. When I started working in Bucks County, on those Bucks County profiles, a young family friend named Ryan Mancuso, really talented kid, went to film school, had a thriving wedding video business. And I brought him on board as my second shooter when we started doing those things. And he's just so good. And as time progressed, we gradually almost switched roles. As he gained, you know, we realized he's a better video shooter than I am. He's a better editor than I am. What am I good at? I'm pretty good at interviewing people, finding the subjects. And so all of a sudden, my work took a leap upwards, because now I had a much better videographer and a much better editor. And between the two of us, we were dangerous. And this is a kid I used to, he's not a kid anymore, he's 30, but I used to literally bounce him on my knee in his diapers. That's how long I've known him. And
wow.
we would do all this stuff together. So the importance of crew and everything is really much more important in video than it is in stills. But I still like to keep it tight. I don't have that directorial personality that can say, second unit, go shoot that. You know, I marvel at like that movie 1917, like, how did they do that? You know, it's just like, how did you keep all those ducks in a row for that single shot? You know, it's interesting. Christopher Nolan's brother, Mike, is a still photographer who works for Lindblad Expeditions. So the director. But anyway, yes, when you move into the three-dimensional chess aspect, it's good to have crew around you. But then, you know, it reaches a certain point where the crew becomes unwieldy, at least in my mind. So I think 2, 3, maybe 4 on the outside. But if it gets to be more than that, I probably shouldn't be shooting that project, you know. But it does help to have like a sound person and stuff like that. When those kids came down, when Louis Sparre came down to do that AOL job, he had 4 plus himself. He had a producer, he had a sound person, and all that stuff. So even for those kind of jobs, they were doing a crew of 5. So it's hard to do good video solitarily. Having said that, people can do it. You know, there's a young man out there shooting now, a guy named Brandon Lee, who is like the king of the one-man travel videos. And he is a genius, and he works simply and by himself. So it can be done.
Are you doing typically with sound? Are you doing the sound yourself, or do you have somebody working as a sound person for you?
I will, you know, if it's a sit-down interview and there's not a lot of time and there's not much money, I'll do my own sound, or I'll bring in a sound person. Most of the time, it's a second shooter kind of a deal. You know, since I moved to Maine and Ryan is back down in New Hope, I haven't found a second shooter up here. But we would take over if somebody was shooting the more important things. One of us would do sound, the other guy would do it. We were like a fluid team, you know. I would be shooting the wides, he'd be shooting the close-ups. We were like a little ballet dancing team, you know, shooting and stuff. And the more you work with your crew, of course, the more they know you, and you know what each other is getting. In among my my Sony colleagues in the program, the Artisans program, there's a husband and wife video team who shoots a lot of weddings, and they're like a choreographed ballet when they work together. They just know who picks up this slack and who lets it go and stuff like that. And so it's never really that your roles aren't that locked in. But if I have to, I can shoot, light, and do the audio on an interview. I can do it. It'll be slower. It'd be faster if there was a sound man and stuff like that. But I know how to do it. It's just a lot of things to keep spinning in your head, you know, checking sound levels while you're checking light and making sure that your subject is still in focus if you're doing a talking head interview. There's a lot to keep, a lot of plates to keep spinning.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about, you know, your transition coming as it did at a particular stage in your career, as you mentioned, when you're in your late 50s trying to start to figure this out, one thing that always struck me, particularly when I was working at Geographic, was the danger of repeating yourself and not growing creatively by taking on new challenges and not moving forward in a sense, because after a while, I think it really could negatively influence your own creativity. What gave you the courage to make the kind of move that you did? Because I think it's fantastic what you've done. And I think it's harder, you know, as you know, the older you get, the harder it is sometimes to make those kinds of moves. So
I think it's not courage. It wasn't courage. I was fed up. I was burnt out. I did not want to go and shoot another city profile and do these things. I just didn't want to do it. You know, in the old days, you could always come back on yourself. If the assignment wasn't the greatest or whatever, you could always say, well, I'm generating some stock and I'm going to make some money. And that's, you know, there's those college funds that we're putting away for and stuff like that. So you had the money thing, and, you know, the money thing and raising a family was always important to me. That's why I did a lot of corporate work. I shot a lot of annual reports. I wasn't a pure journalist. I had 3 kids to house and feed and put through college, you know, and so money was a good motivator. But after a while, I was just fed up. And then that, you know, they put that video in the back of the darn camera, and I was like, movies, man, I love movies. You know, I'm an actor, you know, and so it was more that I was either going to walk away from it and maybe try to go back to the theater, or I was going to adapt. And I wasn't under a great financial pressure. The boys were gone and out of the house. We had lived frugally our whole lives, and my wife had planned for this retirement. I can remember in my annual report heyday when we were making more money than I ever thought I could make, and I'd come back and say, I want to buy a really nice car like this guy, the other corporate photographer. And Peggy would say, no, you're going to have that Toyota Corolla, and here's $900. Go buy yourself a nice 180-28. And I was like, oh, okay. Shiny objects. So she distracted me with shiny objects when I'd say, a boat. You know who just got a boat? My friend Bill just got a boat, and he just shot Xerox. Well, I just shot AT&T. I want a boat. No, honey, you don't want a boat. We're going to be setting up, you know, trust funds for the kids so you don't have to work so hard when you're in your 50s. I was like, my 50s? I'll never get to my 50s. And she'd say, here's $900. Buy a 21 2.8. You know, I was like, oh, okay. And that's the way she kept me at bay, you know. She tossed me some crumbs while she was packing away for the future, you know. God bless her, you know. So you know, I didn't have a gun to my head.
Yeah.
Financially, I didn't have a gun to my head. I wasn't ready to hang up my spurs. And since photography almost started for me as a cool way to see if I could make a little money, I still wanted to, you know, that's how so many of us get some of our validation is, will people pay me to do this? Then I must be decent at it. You know, that I think is it may be old school, because you know, with social media and stuff like that, it's like, well, will I get another 10,000 followers if I do this? Well, that means I'm good. But I don't understand I don't know how to work that system. I know how to work the older system. So so that was a motivation. But it wasn't a courageous move. It was more of a move of desperation and a move to say, you know, you got a little left in you, and this looks like fun. This storytelling. This is bringing all the threads of your life together. The theater, you know, the writing, all these kind of things. Let's see how good you can do it, you know. And so that's what it was for me. Essentially, it was. I was at my wit's end. There was no really reason for me. I don't understand Instagram. I didn't want to shoot any more laughing girls at cafe tables. I didn't want to do that. So it was either do nothing or do something new.
You mentioned writing. How does writing inform your image making?
Well, writing, you know, damn near made my career. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't until I started writing about photography that I was invited to teach up at the Maine photo workshop and stuff. And the way that came about was I was sitting in Travel and Leisure's office one day, and they had a travel photo columnist at that time. And he stormed off and quit in a big huff. And I was sitting in the office, and Chris Hunt, who was the executive editor, walked by me and he said, "You told me you were an English major, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You want to write a column about how to photograph the night sky?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll try it." So, you know, so I wrote that column, and they said, "Oh, you're hired. You're not a bad writer." And even during our work together in Geographic and with Bob Gilka before your time, you know, nobody would look at my portfolio and say, or nobody would get an assignment in your position. Nobody would get an assignment and say, "You know who's the only guy who can do this? Bob Krist." No, I was never that photographer, unfortunately. But if you or Mr. Gilka or whatever got a decent story proposal written by me, you know, you'd give me a flyer. I was a good journeyman type of guy. And at one point, I remember Gilka said, "You know, you're the best writing photographer I've got." He said, you should, you know, you really should consider becoming a writer." And I came home to Peggy and I said, "You know, Mr. Gilka liked my writing so much, he told me I should be a writer. Does that mean I shouldn't be a photographer?" You know, I didn't realize the other shoe of that one. That way, it was that was the original left-handed compliment, you know.
Yeah.
So as I wrote, you know, I had columns, and then I was then the camera manufacturers noticed me. The oddest thing was, you could, at one point in my career, I had the cover of Geographic and I had the cover of Travel and Leisure the same month. Nobody knew me from Adam. But when I started getting a column in Travel and Leisure, Nikon came after me, you know. So by writing about it, you became an expert. So the how-to aspect of my career has been huge, and I cannot underestimate, you know, what it's done to me. But I think that writing, being able to clearly express ideas in writing is paramount to success in any field, but especially our field. You've got to sell ideas, right? You know, you've got to sell those stories and everything. So writing has been really important. And there's the English major thing again, you know, the useless liberal arts education that really isn't useless, you know. So
Right.
so yeah, no, it's been key for me in that how-to thing. You know, now I was with Nikon for many years. I switched when I switched to shooting video a lot. I switched to mirrorless camera system, and Nikon didn't have a mirrorless at that point, and I was able to get my foot in the door with Sony and everything. But again, they only recognized me because I was, at that point, I was a columnist with Outdoor Photographer. So I had a column, a photography column, nonstop in a national magazine, about 6 different magazines over the course from 1986 to 2015 without a break.
Wow. That's
So
an incredible run, Bob.
yeah, it is. And you know, it was in Traveler for 7 years. I was a Pop Photo for 6 years. I was at Travel and Leisure. And so this really, the writing was absolutely key. And so I started teaching way early on. Now everybody's teaching because we're all unemployed and we're all teaching and everything and doing workshops and leading photo tours. I was doing that a while back to the point where now that everybody's doing that, I'm a little burnt out on doing photo tours for sure. But workshops, teaching video workshops to still photographers is not a game for an old guy like me. I've done it about 6 times, and it is hard. It is hard because there's a lot more homework involved than there is for the average still travel workshop. But no, writing is absolutely key.
Cool. Well, I don't want to, I've got more questions, but I don't want to totally monopolize because I know we've also got some questions from other folks. So let me hit you with one that's coming in from our listeners on Facebook. And that is, what are you using to do post-production for your video?
I'm using the only nonlinear editing program that I can get my brain around, and that's Final Cut Pro 10. I started to teach myself to edit video on iMovie. I looked at the old Final Cut 7 and Premiere Pro, and I was never a good backshop guy, whether it was stills in Photoshop or whatever. So editing video is extremely difficult for me. But I find that Final Cut 10 was the easiest one for me to understand. And I don't foresee myself outgrowing it. But, I think it's important for everybody who wants to shoot video to try to edit it, because you will never learn the importance of having a lot of close-ups or shooting a sequence until you lay these pictures out in a timeline. And you got, a 60-second timeline, and you run out of close-ups at 30 seconds, and you're like, damn, I needed more close-ups. And close-ups was not my specialty. I didn't like to shoot detail shots when I was a magazine photographer. And so, I've learned, a couple of lessons, and I've learned them the hard way by editing. And now with my projects, I'm getting pretty decent with the editing, but I'll always send it out for a top edit to one of my more experienced friends and colleagues, so I don't embarrass myself. But I'm getting decent at it. I'll never be great, but it helps you to shoot. So Final Cut Pro 10 has been the easiest for me to learn.
And I mean, I think that's so interesting because it's certainly, everybody that I've ever taught or talked about video, and I'll get to why in a minute, but, I've always thought that, just as you say, the ability to edit your own work teaches you so much about the shooting. And when I was teaching at Syracuse and we had the classes that I taught on editing, I always drew on cinematographer edits to actually teach sequencing, because I thought that, the way that films are structured visually, you could only get that, in that place,
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely key to shoot sequences and stuff. And that's when I've taught my stills to video workshop, the concept of the sequence is what I bang home from day one all the time. And it's a hard concept for most of us still photographers to learn, although it shouldn't be too hard for magazine photographers, because we've always had to pace our stories with wide establishing shots and medium shots and stuff. But you have to do that every situation you shoot. Everything has to be a mini sequence, and about 10 or 15 close-ups for cutaways and stuff. And that's a tough concept for still photographers to grasp.
Yep. And you mentioned that that as you were getting into video, you were looking at work by other filmmakers to really study their moves and kind of reverse engineer how they were thinking about their structure. And this is a question asking as a wannabe filmmaker, do you have any recommendations regarding who I should be following right now on YouTube?
Well, if you're interested in travel has kind of been my bailiwick. This young guy, Brandon Lee, is quite a genius. There's another guy, is an Italian guy named Oliver Astrologo. He's fantastic. There's a group out of, I think they're out of Portland, and they're called Muse Storytelling. And the principal's name is Patrick Demarche. He's got a French last name, but it's called Muse. And they do beautiful human-based documentaries. But he is a psychology major turned videographer, and he's made a science of story. And so I've taken a number of the Muse storytelling courses. I'm currently enrolled in Brandon Lee's course in cinematography. He does a lot with gimbals and stuff. And when you see Brandon's gimbal work, it's like smooth as silk and stuff. But he's like a handsome young stud. And when I kind of lumber along with my gimbal, it just doesn't look like Brandon Lee. So I have to lower my sights a little. But those guys, I often send people to my Vimeo site, not to look at my films, but look at my likes. In my likes, I've curated about 300 short films that I'm always on Vimeo looking. And if I like a film, it stays in your likes. And you can go through those and see a lot of young filmmakers. I'm drawing some blanks on some other names. I follow about 30 people on Vimeo, and they're just so good. They're just so good. But for travel, I'd say that Brandon Lee is probably my role model, my hero. But the guys at Muse Storytelling, the way they tell human stories for NGOs and stuff, and the way they can dig in and make a story out of anything, it's masterful. And they're masterful shooters too. Those are the places that I'd go first.
Okay. And one of the things that another question that's come in is, because of video, and schlepping gear, has that workload, has the schlep load increased for you with doing video, and how do you get around that?
You do have to carry a little more gear. You're carrying some sound gear and everything. But because I am an old arthritic guy with bad knees and a bad back and everything, I have made a science, an absolute science of finding the smallest, lightest piece of gear that will do the job. And I'm thinking of resurrecting the blog, just because in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been able to get it down. It can be more than stills, but I've seen people go out on stills with giant bags and everything like that. Mm-hmm. I've got it down pretty much to a science of the smallest stuff, but I still, I still like to take Peggy along to carry the drone in the gimbal bags, so she'll just carry the drone bag, because the drone bag, no matter how small your drone is, it's an extra bag. The gimbal is hard to fit in. There is a little more gear, but really speaking, I'm looking forward to the day when I can do most of my work with that little RX100 series point and shoot Sony and their little RX0. I dream of a day when you just go out with these mini microphones, and I dream of that day. It's coming. I could do it if I could figure out a way to get nice bokeh from a small sensor, the 1-inch sensor in that RX100, RX10 series. If I could figure out how to do bokeh that way, I could do it. But I'm working on it.
So what's your go-to camera now for video?
I have two go-to cameras. One is an amateur bridge camera that Sony makes called the RX10-4. It's a 1-inch sensor camera, but it has a built-in 35 millimeter equivalent 24 to 600 millimeter lens. So this is a tremendous zoom range, and it's a backlit, sensor. It has a headphone jack. It shoots 4K. It's an amazingly versatile camera. And I recently figured out on the last one of my high-end tours that I had to cover, it was a jet tour of Africa. And, you're shooting wildlife. I'm not a wildlife photographer, but they wanted stills too. And I was like, oh, geez, moments with lions and stuff like that. But there's actually a way to set up the 1-inch chip cameras that in the middle of a 60 frame HD sequence, you hit the shutter button and it just kicks out a 17 millimeter JPEG. And it's really an amazing JPEG, and it doesn't interrupt the flow of the shooting. So I was able to fulfill my assignment using this amateur camera. The other camera that I use is the A6600. It's a crop sensor camera. I know that everybody is like full frame, full frame, full frame. Did you ever ask when you were director of photography, when people went digital, are you using a full frame or what?
Never.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares, right, Tom?
No.
Yeah, from
No.
your mouth to YouTube's lips, nobody cares. If Tom Kennedy doesn't care whether you're using a full frame or crop sensor, who else cares? You know who cares? Your colleagues and your other YouTubers and stuff. So I don't have the hang up. Using the crop sensor, I use smaller lenses, and they're lighter and everything. So everything, you know, I like to say that the older and heavier I get, the newer and lighter I want my cameras to be, because you know it's a, you know, I'm on a diet now, but I'm always putting my cameras on diets.
Oh, I'm speaking as one who's got the same bad shoulder situation going on.
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
appreciate where you're coming from.
Oh man, yeah.
My shoulders are shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have another, this is getting into the business aspect of things. And obviously pricing is different than for film than it is for, you know, still photography licensing. So this question is, how do you price your video, bid, invoice versus stills? Do you charge per minute of footage shot and or deliverable minutes? Is post included or extra, and at what rate? So it's a pretty detailed question about, you know, how
the
you
rates,
think about pricing.
you know, the rates vary, just like the rates varied in still photography between editorial, corporate, and advertising. You know, they have a cascade. But there are two basic ways to deliver: per finished minute, and or, you know, time and materials kind of a thing. And for the time and materials kind of a thing, you need to figure out what your time is worth, how much you need to make, how much, you know, you're going to put out for crew, for music rights, all that kind of thing. Figure that in, and then add whatever percentage above that. The per minute price, finish per minute price, clients love that. And at times it can be very useful, because they know what they're going to spend going out the door. But I would only do that price per minute pricing when there was no travel involved. So for instance, when I was working for the Bucks County Tourist Board doing those personality profiles, you know, what's a quarter of a tank of gas? So that was it. So I gave them a finish per minute thing. I knew what Ryan and I needed to make. I knew by the third or fourth one, we were a well-oiled machine, and we could knock off that in maybe we could knock off a story in 2, maybe 3 4-hour shooting sessions and stuff. And then we'd put in 1 revise included in that. And if you want more revises, we start the clock all over again. Well, that is the greatest way to get people from stopping to, you know, mess up your stuff, because you know, you do a rough cut and they show it to the committee, and everybody on the committee is suddenly now auto premature, you know. Well, you know, they should have this and stuff like that. And they're like, well, you know, we got script approval, we had a storyboard kind of a thing, and once they signed off on that, they got 1 minor revision, and after that the clock started ticking again. And surprisingly, I was able to talk these clients out of a lot of this group speak. The more people who review your film, the more you open yourself up to that. So if you're going to do a per finished minute pricing, put that caveat in, 1 or maybe 2 versions. And after that, you charge by the hour, and you make it an enormous amount. And that will discourage every, you know, wannabe director who, you know, on the tourist board who runs the Chevrolet dealership and wants to, you know, become a film director. So those are the 2 ways. What you charge is what you need to charge, and you got to figure that out. If you take some of these courses like from Muse Storytelling, they get into the nitty gritty of how to figure your, you know, your profitability and all that kind of stuff. I kind of did it off the top of my head, but they'll give you some real hard formula on that. and I would suggest that. You know, there's different tiers, and then, you know, when you reach my age and everything, there's a point where you start giving back and everything. So like I'm doing some stuff for the local land trust here in Booth Bay Harbor, which is where I tripped and fell and got my black eye while flying a drone. Don't walk and fly drones if you're over 60.
That's a moral.
That's if there's one takeaway from this, don't walk forward with a drone, look up in the trees and keep walking. That's no good. That's not good filmmaking. But you know, they approached me. I had done one of my self-assigned stories on a living history program out here at the Burnt Island Lighthouse. When we first moved up to Maine, you know, I taught up at the Maine workshops for 25 years, but I never got out and saw Maine. I was always in the classroom. And now I'm like a kid in a candy store, you know, and so I'm making my little films, you know, and stuff. And they saw that and they said, we really want to do a film about these. We're highlighting these 4 things. And I went on their website and I saw that they had worked with a very talented young videographer in town here. And I said, well, you really should go to him first. And I'm not going to, you know, do a pro bono gig for you guys if I'm taking food out of a young guy's mouth who's starting out, because I don't need the money, but he needs the money. And so I gave him right of first refusal. As it turns out, he's got 3 other projects and he's part owner in a brewery. So he said, no, give it to that guy with my blessings, you know. So I'm working on some pro bono things. And it's great because it's getting me out of the house. It's getting me out on the trail. If it doesn't kill me, it will make me stronger.
So getting back to this pricing thing, the person who asked the question wants a specific example. Can you give one that would kind of give a kind of a breakout of a standard shoot and what was charged?
Yeah, when we did those Bucks County things, I think we gave them a price of $3,000 per finished minute. With one, and that was and they gulped at that in the beginning, but and that's cheap. I think that was really cheap and everything. We upped it as it got along. I can't give real specific. You know, the TV commercial was many times that. I'm not gonna, you know, you know, but
I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna have to find his own way. There's no magic bullet for that. But the thing is, you have to figure your overhead, your equipment, your crew, all that stuff. It's a lot to keep in mind. And that's why videos crews make use of producers. These are people who, you know, we would call them in the still world fixers, but a fixer was just there to keep you out of trouble and everything. But a producer is there to keep the crew. And, you know, a producer, you hire the producer puts together the budget. I've only worked on one job that big. Most of the time, Peggy and I are the producers, and you know, and I'm keeping it small, and I'm keeping it small with intention. I don't have like an ambition to direct a major feature or anything like that. I like my little small niche where I am. I want to get better at it, and I want to do another. You know, most of my self-produced films are in the 6 to 10 minute length. The longest one I did was Iceland, which was 18 minutes. I was aiming to do another, I'm itching to do another kind of 20, 30 minute film, but the COVID has kind of slowed all that down. So, but I don't harbor ambitions to go big. I don't want that stress at this point. You know, Tom, you know, you and I, before we got on the air here, we're talking about our wonderful colleague, Stephen Wilkes' film about Jay Maisel. Wilkes just, oh my God, that guy, his still work blows my mind, and his film work just set me back. I mean, he came out of the gates the way Stephen does, you know. Just he was, you know, with a full-length, fabulous documentary. I'm not that way. I got to go baby steps, you know. So, but you know, he did it. He really did it.
No, it was, you know, yeah, it's a great film. I recommend it, as you are, to anybody who's seen it. It's about Stephen Wilkes was one of Jay Maisel's many assistants, and the film is really about their relationship and Jay moving out of his building in the Bowery at the end of his career, at least that phase of his career. Another question. Can you talk a little bit about how you develop the story arc treatments in your documentary work, and whether you're doing a complete storyboard when you're working with a client in order for them to buy into the script, and script development, that kind of thing?
To find the story arc, usually you find your character first, and you look for the character who either the character will present himself or herself, and then you try to identify what their journey is. For instance, when we did this film for Bill Black about it was called Charlotte's Story for the therapeutic horsemanship, I asked Bill to find me family that was using the farm that had a compelling story, and he found this lovely family with the young girl who had cerebral palsy and a couple of other things, and how her work with the horses was giving her a little joy in her life, and what it meant to the family and stuff like that. So we qualified the subject, and then the story arc was this little girl's very hard existence, and the joy in the life that being on a horse, even though there were like 4 people had to hold her onto the horse and stuff, but her little face lit up, and the mom and the dad and the little sister. So there was a story there. I choke up every time I think of it, but it was finding the story first, and so that is the important thing. That's how I find the story arc. Find the right subject. Find out with the most compelling story. As far as storyboarding, I'm not that visionary. I can do it a little bit more than storyboarding. I'll give a basic shot list of what we're going for, because mine is still a very reactive form of filmmaking. I'm not a director yet. I'm trying to become more of a director, but I like to think it's the reason I was an editorial photographer, not an advertising photographer, is I was better at discovering things and watching things unfold than I was at making them happen, directing, being the maestro of everything. So a really great director, of course, is going to have every shot sketched out in his head or her head by the time before they go to, but I haven't been able to work that way. There's only been 1 or 2 clients. There were a couple pitches where I had to make storyboards, but they were completely made up out of my head. I had no idea what I was doing, but they wanted storyboards. By the time I got the job, the shot list and the script approval was enough for them. So it's an art that I have not mastered as part of this. I mean, there's so much to learn in this arena.
I know. And I mean, I'm struck by that too, because I think the way you're describing the way you think about story coming out of a still background sounds incredibly logical to me, that you would be more prone to do the discovery in the moment as you're kind of unpacking the story, rather than having it all plotted in advance. I mean, that to me is totally logical.
Yeah, that's kind of narrative movie making as opposed to documentary movie making, where you've got plans and stuff. That's not saying that you can't, when you're doing an illustrative kind of story for an NGO that isn't a documentary, you can't finesse certain things. Oh, why don't you, let's get a sequence of you brushing the horse down or something like that, and you make suggestions and everything. But no, I don't harbor narrative filmmaking desires or ambitions. It's way above my head, way above my head.
2 questions about audio, and then we can wrap with a couple more of my questions. But one is, what kind of gear are you using? And then can you talk about why recording sound is that important, particularly in those contexts where, somebody's going to do the kind of voiceover work that we were hearing in some of your pieces that you showed today?
Well, one of the hardest things for us visual people to understand is the importance of audio. And I was introduced to it long before I took up video making. I used to host these instructional videos for Nikon, And I can remember we were up on the roof of a hotel in Key West, and I had to do this very complicated move talking about the new camera. I had to walk and talk, hit 3 different spots, and then end up in a certain spot, and I didn't have a teleprompter. I was all going from my head. And I did this like 45-second walk and talk. And at the very end, the sound guy's there saying, nah, we got to do it again. We got to do it again. There was a plane. And I said, what do you mean do it again? Just take the plane out. And the director stops, shuts the thing down, and he pulls me aside. He says, you don't talk to the sound man like that. Nobody changes sound. He is the king of the set. I'm like, what do you mean? It's sound, So I was like, oh, okay. Be nice to the sound guy, So yes, the importance of audio. I try to use a small shotgun mic on the camera. Lately, they've got these wonderful little 2.4 gigahertz wireless setups. The Rode Video Mic Go, which is a little clip-on. It's about an inch square mic and then an inch square receiver, and you just plug the whole thing onto somebody's shirt. You're not running. You don't have to run a cord down to a pack and everything, and it's very convenient. It's very fast. And I've also been using this 2-channel mic setup from France called Pico Gear, and they're a little tie clip size, 2 little mics that rest in the receiver, and you can have 2 channels. The receiver goes in there, and again, you just clip it on, and you're not running microphones down there. I had to do this. I had to do this series of videos for it was a climate change video run by a group of wealthy people who had woken up to climate change and formed this thing. And I had to go to Princeton and shoot all these elegant ladies of wealth. And I was my own sound man, and the producer was trying to get microphones down, matrons' backs and stuff. I was like, no, there's got to be a better way. And these new 2.4 kilohertz mics where you just clip it on, saving the day. So I've been using that a lot lately and really enjoying the freedom that they give you. And you can run, I have a little splitter, so I'll have a small shotgun on the camera, and I'll have the wireless go on the subject. Like I'm working on a video now, a little personality profile about this ex-Army guy who is a equestrian, and he does these equestrian events up and down Maine. He's like a cowboy in Maine, and he came riding up the street the other day, and Peggy found him, and we got talking. And so I'm going to be covering him next weekend, and I'll have a little shotgun on my camera, but I'll have the mic on him, a wireless mic on him, and then a little splitter cord that'll put the wireless into the left channel, the microphone into the right channel, and then I'll mix it later on. So there's ways, every day there are new technologies that are making it easier and smaller for us to work more simply. And there will always be purists who will say, oh, that's not good enough and everything. But keep in mind that 95% of what we're seeing, what we're producing, is going to be viewed online. And by the time YouTube and Vimeo get finished crunching it and compressing it and everything, those little subtleties in audio that you might notice in a movie theater or something like that they don't become as important. So the important thing is that you get a mic on the person, whether it's the and stuff like that. So I'm not saying that that you should embrace the aesthetic of good is good enough, but in ways when you're a guerrilla filmmaker, sometimes that's the case.
Okay, that's great. And here's another question. You mentioned that photo editors are increasingly looking for motion work by still photographers. Do you think that they don't have access to videographers who've come up sort of on that side of the house? And this person is asking, as someone who's been a DP for 25 years and finds it a very competitive working with video producers.
Well, I don't understand what photo editors from what organization,
I suppose that some of the ones that you've been, from the magazine world, or some of the other ones that you've.
Well, I'm finding, strangely enough, the last market, the first market when I started making short travel films, the first market I thought of was magazine blogs and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Magazine websites have been among my least successful placements of travel films and stuff like that. So I think you're talking maybe to hotel websites. I just saw that I forget which, maybe it's Relais and Chateau or one of those really high-end hotel associations is doing, they got a call out for virtual vacation videos. They want beautiful B-roll of different locations and stuff like that. So I think that magazines probably are the last place that I'd go to place travel videos now. I'd look for hotels, I'd look for travel organizations and stuff. As a DP with 25 years of experience, obviously whoever this person is has way more experience than I do, but maybe not as a one-man band.
Mhm.
And so, if you've been a DP for 25 years, you've been working in crews, and that's what you've been doing. So maybe the secret from that aspect is to hook up with a good producer, somebody who can
Mhm.
write those pitches and stuff like that, because there's not too many people that can do it all equally well. So if this person is a DP with 25 years of experience and wants to start doing the whole thing, maybe the key would be to look for a good producer and work
Mhm.
together as a team.
So who are you looking at now as, the people you want to work with? How are you deciding that? I know you're doing a lot of work right now for philanthropic organizations. Are those passion projects, or are you actually finding that as an opportunity, a market that's underserved in a sense?
Well, I think the NGO and the nonprofit market is huge as a good paying market. Depending on what NGO or nonprofit it is, depends on whether I go for the money or I try to give them a break. When I'm working for our little foundation, Peggy won't pay me, so I do it for nothing. But I'm really not interested in working for anybody but me now. Really, what I want to do is I want to do the stories I want to do, and I'll put them out there, and let's see what happens. I'm 68 now. I was 58 when I started this process. I've kind of hit a plateau with needing more people to really up it a notch, and I'm not sure I want to do that. But there are places I want to go. There are characters, and moving up here to Maine has been wonderful because if there's a theme to my work or whatever, it's to try to find those characters and those traditions that are under threat. I mean, everything's under threat these days.
Right.
I mean, our whole way of life is under threat. But these traditional ways of life, these traditional crafts, these traditional people. So up here in Maine, I found a guy who runs this crazy. I drove past it for 25 years. This crazy toy museum. And finally I went in there and I said, who is this guy? And he was an eccentric professor a retired professor from UConn. And he had the most amazing collection off the side of the road. And these are the kind of people I want to document. So I'm not worried about getting work. I'm worried about, I just want to do these stories. I want to do these stories while my knees still work, while my back still works. And if I can make some money down the line, fine. And I realize that's not a good answer for many people watching because they're not as old and retired, but that's where I am at this point.
Mm-hmm. How are you looking at drones as a part of your arsenal of creativity? I mean,
I'm looking at drones.
Obviously, I know. Drones are dangerous, but are you using them on almost everything that you're doing these days?
You almost have to have a little drone shot, especially if you're doing something in nature or whatever. One of the beauties of working with a young sidekick is that was always the part that Ryan did. Ryan, throw that drone up there and get us an establishing shot, and then I'd go about my business and stuff. Well, again, it's like editing. I will never be a great drone pilot, but I am able to get 10, 15 seconds of decent clips here and there and everything. And that may be all you need in a certain thing. But I think it's important, I think, really speaking, that you have to have grown up on a playing video games to be a good drone pilot. That subtle touch with the joysticks, it doesn't come easy when you grew up playing stickball, you know. So I think younger guys and younger women have a much nicer touch for drones and much more confidence. If my drone goes like more than like 300 or 400 feet away, I'm starting to get the heebie-jeebies. I've run drones, Tom. I've crashed drones in England, Mexico. I haven't crashed one lately, knock on wood. But my love-hate affair with drones has been well documented in Facebook and subjects me to a lot of ridicule among my friends. But I'm getting better, and every project you just need a couple of shots. So I would say it's a very important aspect. Now, I think a lot of filmmakers, especially young filmmakers, have fallen a little too much. The drone is good to give you that overall establishing shot. You know, it's so funny that here in the digital age, back in the day, I can remember, being down in the bar of the governor's house, sitting around with Medford Taylor and Harvey and a bunch of the other guys. And it was one of those nights where we were starting to talk about lottery winning fantasies. What would you do if you won the lottery? Well, here I'm sitting with a table full of National Geographic photojournalists. Everybody always is already traveling everything already, so nobody was about travel. But two things that came out was, I said, I would love to go back and publish a coffee table book of all my stories, edited the way I wanted to edit them with my pictures. And I would love to have a lift truck on permanent loan that would get me about 20 or 30 feet high to get some of those little, just those little elevated viewpoints that really can help make a story. And here we are with the digital age. You can print your own coffee table book, and you got this little tiny thing in your pocket that will give you exactly that. And so every time, I start complaining about the digital isn't not as good as the old days, I think, dude, this little thing is taking the place of that lift truck that you wanted to drive everywhere,
Absolutely. Another final technical question, and then I'll kind of wrap with a couple of questions of my own. How have you had to make big improvements in computing power and storage backup, and how has that been for you? Given the fact that you're now working in video.
Yeah, the hard drives. That famous line from Heart of Darkness, "Oh the horror, oh the horror." When he's going to, I've modified that to "Oh the hard drives, the hard drives." It's just, Peggy's looking at the American Express bill saying, "This is more hard drives?" And I'm like, yeah. So yeah, I'm not, again, as good a digital archivist as I should be, but I've kind of settled on these little hard drives, and I have 2 sets of everything. But yeah, it blossoms, of course, with when you went from HD to 4K. You need 4 times the space and stuff. So it really is hard to keep up. And I've got a pretty good little 13-inch MacBook that and it's already grinding and slowing on some of this new HLG footage and stuff. So it's a constant grind. Just when you're getting used to one operating system, you need more and stuff.
Yeah.
It is true. It seems to be blossoming in almost a geometric pattern, and with the hard drives anyway. But it's a fact of life. It's something that you put up with video.
Okay, and this, I'm not sure what this is referring to, but I'll ask it anyway. He says, ask about your favorite 50 millimeter lens. And I have no idea what that means, Bob, but there must be something to this question.
Okay, this is probably from Paul Jarrow, who is another photojournalist and Sony artist. And it has to do with me complaining about how every lens manufacturer is coming out with 50 millimeter lenses for Sonys. There must be like 40 or 50 millimeter lenses. But there still isn't a nice compact 70 to 150 zoom for crop sensor. So that's a little inside joke. It's
Got
like
it.
everybody and his mother is making 50 millimeter lenses. How many do you need, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, that explains that question.
Yeah.
And then just finally, thinking about your legacy as a photographer and thinking sort of about the next generation coming up. And I will wrap with this question. How do you think about the work that you've done, and what kind of advice would you be giving to the next generation of photographers starting out today? And they don't have to necessarily be young people. They just be somebody coming into the business.
Well, I never really thought much about my legacy as a photographer, because I was always just busy earning a living and trying to get that next assignment. But now that I'm at a certain age and looking back, my favorite assignments were those that were documenting these traditional ways of life, traditional culture, interesting people. And if I have a legacy at all, I did that book, and we didn't get a chance to talk too much about that book, but
People want to know how to order it. I'll tell you.
Well, right now in COVID, ordering is under suspension because the books are in Pennsylvania and I'm in Maine, so it's just as well. But when that book is available again, we sold it. We sold about half the print run in December before we left for Mexico, and all the proceeds go to the Jonathan Krist Foundation. So I figured if I was going to lose money publishing a book, let me lose it all, and give it to the foundation. And it's been a good experience. But once we can get hold of those books again, I'll start promoting them.
Because I know people are going to want to buy it.
Yeah, it's and when we can get those books up, we'll start selling them, and I'll do another big push on Facebook. But that book was part of the legacy I wanted to leave. Because really, the title kind of wraps it up. The old souls, those enduring types, you meet them along the way in your life. They're one of a kind. Sometimes they seem like out of time in a place or an era that's not ours, and we seem to be in such a disposable kind of environment. So I like to think that my legacy, I don't know, would be that trying to do good stories about these kind of interesting things before they disappear, because stuff is disappearing like crazy, but I don't know. I think, the legacy that might be more lasting is the work that Peggy and I are doing with the Johnny Foundation and stuff like that. That's honest to God, that's probably a more lasting legacy. But in terms of my photographic and video legacy, it would be, trying to capture those things, like I did a little short documentary about Day of the Dead in Mexico. Day of the Dead is transmogrifying every year to become more and more like American Halloween. It'll never die out entirely, especially in the but here we have a document of the way it was before Coco and before Hollywood. Every year now on these Day of the Dead things, you see more superhero costumes. And so documenting these aspects of culture, I think is an important legacy. And I forgot what this. Go ahead.
I'll get to that, but I mean, I think listening to you, what I'm realizing that has always been so powerful in your work is that you convey a sense of your own enthusiasm for the work that you're doing, right? And I've sensed that in the photographs, but I also sense a great respect for the people and the situations that you're photographing. And what that does for me as an audience member is it teaches me about the value of those lives in a way that are outside of my own direct experience. And I guess to me, that's an incredible gift that you're giving to the world.
Well,
what you're doing.
It's an incredible gift that's been given to me. The camera, and this is why, a lot of people say, well, you miss the theater. I do miss a lot about the theater and stuff, but the camera has been like a license to be curious, to explore other people's lives. And I've always been, that's the part of travel that I found and find continue so fascinating is that camera is an excuse to find out to find out a little more about that person and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of my current bugaboos with a lot of young travel filmmakers on YouTube who think that travel videos, they've kind of conflated them with vacation videos. So here's an epic shot of me and my girlfriend on the beach in Iceland. Wow, I'm going to do a droney pull away and stuff. And like, you know, you can go on Vimeo and see hundreds, if not thousands of videos of Iceland without ever seeing an Icelandic person in them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no. You're not traveling for your gram. You're traveling to broaden your horizons. You're traveling to meet people who aren't like you. You're traveling to discover the common humanity in people who aren't like you. That's why you travel, not to make your friends jealous because you're up on this mountain and, you know, my girlfriend's hot. And, you know, it's like, no, you know, and there's an awful lot of that kind of narcissism. So I'm, yeah, it's been a gift for me. It's been a gift for me to have this camera that has validated and given me an excuse to be curious about other people.
Well, this conversation has been a gift for me and I'm sure for the audience, Bob. So I really want to thank you for that. It's been a great couple of hours talking with you. And for everybody who's listening, I hope you've been as enthusiastic about the conversation as I have been. And we obviously want to be continuing to do this with all of you and having you attend these webinars on a regular basis as we do them. I'm hoping that a lot of you are members of ASMP because that's always great. But if you're not and you're so inclined, bit.ly ASMP-support is a way you can make a contribution that enables us to continue these conversations. So again, Bob, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Fantastic.
I really enjoyed it. It was great catching up.
You. Yeah, likewise. Okay. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. And we'll hope to see you on Friday for our next town hall and next Wednesday.